Why don't we go ahead and get started? We can get some of the preliminaries taken care of as legal counsel catches up with us. I'm going to call this Board Policy Committee meeting to order, and we will start with our roll call. Madam Clerk. Sorry.
Find the button. Thank you, Madam President. President Taylor.
I'm here.
Trustee Smith. Trustee Rodriguez. Trustee Vice President Nicolette.
Present.
I am here. Trustee Mayberry. I'm here. Trustee Church. Here. We have a quorum, Madam President.
All right, thank you very much. And I will say as we get started, I know a couple of our colleagues have hard stops. 12:30 is for Trustee Smith and 1 o'clock for Trustee Mayberry, I believe, and 1 o'clock for Trustee Smith. And then there is our final graduation of the season. The Highlanders from Incline High School walk the stage tonight, this afternoon, this evening, sort of, early evening, at 4 p.m. And so we will end our meeting at 2:30 today. For though I have a work engagement out of town. But for those trusts, and I hate it, it's the only time I've ever missed them, other than when I was sick. But anyway, we want to make sure and give our full support and congratulations to the Highlanders. And so we'll get out of here by 2:30 to make sure that people can take the drive. I think there may even be some construction along the way, so we certainly want to give adequate time to work around that as well. So we're going to, and then so any committee, any items we don't get to today will have to be continue because we cannot go past 2:30. Okay, we're going to jump right into agenda item 2.01. This is call for the approval of the minutes of the May 17th meeting. Before I ask for a motion, is there any public comment on this, Jeannie? No public comment. Okay, thank you. I'm looking for a motion if that's the pleasure of the board. Moved by Trustee Rodriguez. Is there a second? Seconded by Trustee Manetto. Any discussion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Right, the motion carries. Let the record show that it is unanimous. We're going to move on to agenda item 2.02, discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and or forward the proposed revisions of Board Policy 6800, Special Education, specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And before us is Area Superintendent Jen Van Tress. We'll turn it over to you, ma'am.
Good morning, President Taylor, Superintendent McNeil, and members of the board. I am Jennifer Van Tress, Area Superintendent in the Office of School Leadership and oversee special education. I'm here to present the updated special education board policy in order to make sure that we conform with our current policy and procedures. Just to highlight a couple of the changes, the format has been realigned to match all of the other board policies. You'll notice that the definition for achievement gap has been removed, as this is not in compliance in processes with how our RTI process, our response to intervention process works when we identify children with disabilities. We've also, as far as the definition section, taken out the section about teacher evaluations, as that belongs with HR and not necessarily limited or appropriate for special education. Our policies overall, you'll see that most of them stayed the same. We just took out a lot of, it was a lot of wording. We made it very succinct and tight as far as the wording is concerned. So at this point, do you have any questions or clarifications?
On this policy, I do know there's
on this policy.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Ms. Van Tress. Trustee Mayberry.
Thank you, President Taylor. Thank you, Van Tress, Ms. Van Tress. Van Tress.
Van Tress. You can call me. Van Tress
don't
works.
even. Don't.
No, I know. I stopped myself. Did you see that? I stopped myself.
Very good. Very good.
So I don't think I have any edits or proposals. I do want to ask you if you can just do a little deeper dive for us. Page 3, just go straight to page 3. Top of page 3, it's the new section A, professional learning to district employees, focus on inclusive practices. Mm-hmm. Can you just tell us what that looks like?
So when you talk about inclusive practices, you talk about how do you include students with disabilities throughout an entire school day, or actually their school career, their school, whether it's during the school day or outside the school day, how do we make sure that we are including them, and what do those practices look like? So, for example, one of the big ones would be, how do you make sure that students are appropriately included in music performances? That would be a big one. And not only just music performances, but how do you make sure they're included in recess? PE, how do you make sure they're included throughout the library? I'm thinking elementary, but even in the secondary, how do you make sure that they're included in the science and their science labs? Making sure that they also have the opportunities to participate to the fullest extent possible. So
we have these training opportunities, mandatory training, in place today at the Washoe County School District.
So we are currently working with the CI&A department, the Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Department. We've already designed, or we're working with them on creating, with the music department in particular, for our first aid back in the fall. We're also working, we always work with curriculum instruction to build the capacity of our learning facilitators, and that's also a strong focus, so that when our learning facilitators are directly working with our general education teachers in the classroom, that the special education components for students with special education needs in the classroom are also being provided through not only our learning facilitators. We also have our special ed facilitators that are in the buildings and the classrooms as well to help build those inclusive practices. So it's boots on the ground in the classrooms. Clearly, we've had some situations lately that have been brought to the forefront that we've missed some opportunities, and we are focusing in on those for the upcoming school year.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Ms. Van Tress. I was going to ask, and I see you as well, Trustee Smith. I was going to ask about, the challenges that sometimes we miss. We have almost 4,000 instructors, almost 8,000 employees, and then sometimes everything isn't. Sometimes things, people mess up, right? Because they're humans, and human beings make mistakes, right? So as you took a look at that, were there things that you observed as the one who really oversees? You're our expert in special ed. Like, hey, we should do something a little bit differently. That kind of brought that. Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So in particular with the music programs, Trustee Minetto can also, she has some background with music, but I know that we were working directly with our teachers that work at Piccolo, and they're the ones that are going to be working with some of our teachers to show some really great opportunities about how you can be inclusive into the music program. I know that for me, I saw a couple of things that we could have done differently just on inclusive, just because a child might not be verbal doesn't mean that they don't have opportunities to learn in a music classroom and in library section and science labs. They all have the opportunity, and it's working with our general education teachers to really show them the opportunities and the success. Sometimes, even as adults, we're afraid to try. And so we need to give them the opportunities to try and say it's okay if it's not perfect, but we still need to give them the opportunities and the the understanding of what can happen. A lot of teachers, we've been practicing for a long time, so it's been a long time since we've had to use those skills that we learned in college, and so it's the reminding, it's the rebuilding of the skills from here. So those were some of the things that we're going to target coming.
I appreciate that, because I think the important thing is when we see there's an opportunity, maybe we've missed something that, okay, whether we just take care of the situation, and then what do we do and how do we address it so that we do better, and it doesn't continue to happen. So thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Definitely.
Trustee Smith?
Thank you. I'm going to preface my question by saying that I'm not getting to or expecting any answers on program changes that are specific. But as I look at this, I'm reminded of an email that not all of us received, but some of us received, that seems to go to the heart of number 4 under definitions and the least restrictive environment. So some environments, though, some environments create opportunities for, and you'll have to walk me through the wording because I want to make sure that I say this correct. So we have our students who are typically abled, and then we have our students who are differently abled. Some environments, though, are exclusive to students who are differently abled versus other environments where they are blended together. Because I generally really support number 4, which is to the maximum extent appropriate, but I know we've received some emails about that. So can you walk us through where these definitions fit and like where we create those, the maximum extent appropriate, but sometimes certain classrooms don't lend themselves to having typically able peers in them, because there's nothing in the board policy that dictates that. That's more so on the district administrative side, right?
Yes and no. So yes, we will clarify it in the administrative side, but also least restrictive environment is determined by the IEP team. So the IEP team will look at what the specially designed instruction is. So when you develop an IEP, you first determine that a child has a disability, and that disability requires specially designed instruction or instruction that is not able to be provided by the general education teacher in a general ed setting. So once you've determined that a service is not able to be provided in the least restrictive environment, least restrictive is always general education first. So once you determine that the services are not able to be provided in that setting, then you look to see how they can be provided. And then from there, you determine the percentages of time or the level of services that are needed. So let's say that you have a child with autism, and that with a child with certain autism is a big spectrum, so that will need services. But let's say that they need more of a discrete trial training program, where in a discrete trial training program, you're looking at a child that may not have your basic skills needed to be successful in a general ed classroom. So let's say if we take it back to a basic, they may need help with understanding, one-to-one correspondence. And they don't learn it necessarily the same way a typical child will learn it, but they need repetitive opportunities for this. So it could be that you do 9 out of 10 trials. So it may be that a discrete trial training where you sit there and you have 9 out of 10 trials with a child with autism in what we would consider our strategies classrooms. That is not something that would be really appropriate to do in a general education setting. So that's when we determine that the specially designed instruction is discrete trial training, and that has to be done in a different location. So from there, you're always there's a given ebb and flow back and forth between the least restrictive environment and then your more, what we would consider our more restrictive or self-contained programs, such as our strategies, our CLS programs, which stands for Comprehensive Life Skills, and then our SIP program, which is our social intervention programs, and those are designed for behavior, and the CLS is designed for children that are more on a functional curriculum. So again, in a functional curriculum, we may be teaching the child to recognize stop signs, what to do with traffic lights, how do you safely cross the street. Again, that wouldn't be appropriate to do in a general education classroom, because typically a child in general education is able to learn those skills on their own and don't need specific practice. So we're always striving to have the least restrictive. We always want children in with the Tier 1 instruction, because that's what we know they need in order to graduate with a standard diploma, which is always our goal. But we have to make sure they've got the skills in place in order to be able to be successful in a Tier 1 general ed setting. So we're always striving for that. Have I kind of explained it? Have I gone too far? Not enough? Okay, sure.
All right. Looking to see there's no further questions, so if it's the pleasure of the board, we've already asked for public comment on this, and there's none. If it's the pleasure of the board, we're looking for a motion. Trustee Mayberry?
Move to approve.
Okay, move to approve agenda item 2.02. Second, motion by Trustee Mayberry, seconded by Trustee Rodriguez, that the Board Policy Committee forwards the proposed revisions of Board Policy 6800, special education, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposition? There's none, so the motion carries, and it is unanimous, 7-0. Thank you very much, Ms. Van Tress. Okay, we're going to push on to agenda item 2.03, discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or forward the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7086, school closure, specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And Mr. Searcy is back before us. Welcome, sir.
Hey, good afternoon. Adam Searcy for the record. Board Policy 7086, school closure. It's a rather brief board policy, and no meaningful changes are being recommended. There's a variety of language updates, etc. You know, again, it's a rather brief policy. Potential scenario such as outlined in Section 2 may consider such an action with extensive inclusion of the public and school community. I don't feel there's any noteworthy proposed changes.
Thank you, Mr. Searcy. Do we have any public comment on this one, Jeannie?
No, there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Trustee Mayberry, I saw you first. Is your lights on?
Oh, my
Oh,
apologies.
should not be. Okay, that's okay. Then Trustee Church, sir?
Just a very brief comment. Maybe at some future date we can look at some of this, but I just look at this and I go, why do we need this? Could it not be consolidated? We have so many policies that I'm for it. Yeah, I'm yes, but I just wonder in the future if we can consolidate some of these or eliminate them.
But your mic went on and off. I wanted to catch your whole comment on the
Yeah.
record.
Anyway, that was it. Just that down in the future, maybe we can consolidate or eliminate some of these.
Thank you, Trustee Church. Further discussion? Seeing none, looking for a motion, if that's the pleasure of the board, for agenda item 2.03. Moved by Trustee Rodriguez. Is there a second? Seconded by Trustee Manetto. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Searcy. You see you're still with us for agenda item 2.04. Discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or forward the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7100, capital projects and facilities management, specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. Mr. Searcy, back to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple noteworthy modifications proposed here. The purpose, just minor clarifications and word revisions. Section 1, there was a statement related to the subsections beneath Section 1A where we modified the language in priority order. We felt while these subcategories of capital renewal, revitalization, new schools, and expansions of existing schools were appropriate categories, we didn't want to tie the board or staff's hands with that language in priority order. But this passage Section 1A is noteworthy. It's really foundational to the capital program that you guys are all very familiar with, developing a 5-year capital improvement plan and prioritizing and reviewing that on an annual basis. So that's really what that change is about. Moving on, Section 1B, it referenced a variety of very specific planning documents, which is not an all-inclusive list, so we felt that it would be more appropriate just to leave the statement 1B, all planning documents that are approved by the board will be included when formulating the CIP, rather than provide some specific list that is inevitably not entirely inclusive. The modifications to Section 1C are largely to remove what is essentially antiquated terminology. You know, some committee names and things like that were used in the past. Now we'll say, using the capital improvement plan as a foundation, the facilities management department will develop the capital renewal plan annually for the board's approval, which is literally exactly what we just did earlier this morning. And then Section 1D, a slight change between every major phase in a project the board will review prior to initiating the major phase of design and prior to initiating the major phase of construction. Last meaningful change I wanted to draw your attention to on page 3, it would be section 2A2, specifically restricting planning of facilities to grade configurations as followed: elementary K through 5, middle 6 through 8, high 9 through 10. That's not necessarily the case in the instances of like Gerlach, et cetera. With the opening of the new O'Brien and Swope Middle School and subsequent rezoning actions, we will actually have aligned all of our middle schools with a 6 through 8 configuration, and that remains our objective, but to restrict the board and the staff in this fashion we felt was unnecessary, and so we're recommending to eliminate that level of specificity. Sorry, just to continue on page 4 with a couple other noteworthy modifications. The capital funding passage, section 3, is recommending to be deleted. That is covered. So the deletion of that passage and the insertion of under associated documents, section 1B, we're adding board policy 9405, capital projects bond oversight, as the more appropriate document related to capital funding than this particular document. So removing that section 3 up above on page 4, capital funding, from this board policy, and including by reference board policy 9405, which is really the governing policy relative to capital funding. So that's what those changes are about. The rest of the red lines on this document are clarification in nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Searcy. Do we have any public comment on this one, Jeannie?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Trustee Church, I'm looking in this direction, and I see your light first. So.
Thank you. Just how come there's no reference to the Capital Projects Committee or Oversight Committee? Is that because it's covered in that other policy you mentioned?
That's right. That committee is established and governed by that board policy 9405.
And remember, it's the Capital Funding Protection Committee. I don't want someone out there looking for a capital projects committee because we don't have one.
Yeah.
Right? So we know what you mean, but we want to make sure the public is clear. Okay? Dr.
Madam
Nicolette?
President, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I move that the Board Policy Committee forwards the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7100, Capital Projects and Facilities Management, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Second. Motion by Dr. Nicolette, seconded by Trustee Rodriguez. Further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is 6-0. 6-0. We know Trustee Mayberry he was trying to hang in there to 12:30, but he originally said he was leaving at noon. So, okay, we'll go on to agenda item. Thank you, everybody. We'll go on to agenda item 2.05. Discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and or forward the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7120, community use of school buildings and facilities, specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And Mr. Searcy, we are back to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. This board policy is, excuse me, somewhat lengthy, and there are associated administrative regulations and forms that are also quite significant. But in the item before us here today, there are no material changes being proposed, just minor clarification and streamlining of verbiage. Happy to go through and discuss any passages, but really no noteworthy adjustments that we want to talk through.
Thank you, Mr. Searcy. I appreciate that. Let's first go to see if we have any public comment on this, Jeannie.
No public comment.
Thank you very much. I just want to know this. I was dealing with something on this a little earlier in the school year. I think Trustee Church, you were involved in that as well. And the key note here is if they're community groups that would like to use our school facilities, which they certainly can, they're public buildings, but then there needs to be someone at the school who is either connecting with that group or signing up to be their advisor. I forgot exactly the terminology. And sometimes that begins to be that can create a barrier. But we also, from a security standpoint and so on, and safety, there needs to be someone affiliated with the school that's a part of that, and then we can go further. So just wanted to just state that for the record, because I know we ran into that earlier this year. Any other questions, comments? If not, looking for a motion from the board. There are no material changes here.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. What is the tiered system? Let me use the page. Page 3 at the very bottom, 6C. A tiered system shall be maintained to clearly define priority of use.
It's in the administrative regs, and I only know that
It is.
because we had an experience dealing with it this year.
I have it here. It
Okay.
essentially refers to the fee schedule. And so different activities using different parts of the facilities at different times of the year might be more burdensome to the district from a fee or a financial standpoint. And so depending on the facility use request, it might fall into a different tier of the fee schedule.
Thank you. Makes sense.
And again, that's been established and maintained by administrative regulation. Other questions, comments? If not, looking for a motion, if that's the pleasure of the board.
I would be happy to.
Okay, we just have a so move over here, so I'll take
A
that
second.
as a second. All righty. All right, it's okay. I'm going to read it for you.
Can I get the second?
The second, Trustee Nicolette. Oh, the motioner is Trustee Rodriguez. He beat her to it. Okay, Alfegini? All right. Okay, so agenda item, we have a motion on the floor to approve that the Board Policy Committee forwards the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7120, community use of school buildings and facilities, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Again, let the record show it is 6-0. Okay, moving on to agenda item 2.06. Discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or forward the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7110, naming of schools and other district facilities, to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And before us, we see Ms. Megan and Ms. Samantha. I'm sorry, Ms. Megan Downs and Ms. Samantha Fredericks.
Great. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, President McNeil, and Trustee, or the other way around, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a long day.
She's cheating on her head. No offense, but I would not want that job.
Right, exactly. As you said, I'm Megan Downs, the Communications Manager. I'm here on behalf today for Michelle Anderson, our Chief of Communications. Our office has worked with the Office of General Counsel on the recommended changes. We have a lot of minor editorial corrections, such as removing unnecessary language and providing additional clarifying language, and formatting changes that follow Board Policy 9070. With me today is Samantha Frederickson, who is the liaison for the school naming community and knows this policy inside and out, so she's here to go over some of the main changes.
Thank you, Ms. Frederickson, for walking us through this thing. A lot of red and a big policy, so thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. Samantha Frederickson for the record. So as Megan mentioned, quite a few of these changes are actually just clarifications or moving some language around. So I'm going to go through just some of the more detailed changes. So we'll start, and then if you have questions at the end, we can take that too. But starting with Section 2, there is a change in Section 2. Public input shall be solicited and nominations taken for potential names for a school facility, portion thereof, or if appropriate, renaming of a school facility. This is a slight change. We have not taken nominations for portions of facilities, so that's a little bit of a change in the policy there. It also just changes some of the language to make it more clear as it lays out how this process works.
If I may jump in, Ms.
Yeah.
Frederickson, the portion thereof is helpful. You may recall we named a portion of Hug High School for the Feimster family, so that makes it in alignment with, and we knew that was a policy exception, but this allows the board to do that. So.
That is correct. The other change, I think, in this section comes in section 3, the school name enhancement. That's really just clarifying what a school name enhancement is. I think the previous policy just stated that school name enhancements did not apply with this policy, and this gives you a little more definition that a school name enhancement is the act of enhancing the name of an existing school through the addition of a descriptor in the school title. And any school name enhancements shall be brought to the board for approval.
Does that include something such as STEM Academy or something else? Okay.
Yes, I think
Okay.
that's exactly what an enhancement is. So it's not actually changing the name, but changing just that descriptor.
Thank you.
Let's see, and then going through, continuing on, Section 2B, which has to do with plaques and memorials. So the previous language didn't really provide a whole lot of guidance, just said that the district does not encourage the installation of plaques, memorials, and other items in district buildings and facilities. As many of you know who have probably visited all of our new schools, we have plaques in all of our new schools commemorating the namesake. So this just puts it in line with what the process has been. So events or people of outstanding significance to the school or school community, such as the school's namesake, may be commemorated by a plaque or memorial with the approval of the board. See. And then moving on under section 3, there is a slight change. This is regarding the school naming committee. And the only change here really is that, the school naming committee has always made recommendations of naming or renaming schools. This adds the portions of schools and or facilities under the purview of the school naming committee to make those recommendations to the board. So that would be like the Feimster that you mentioned. Those are kind of the main changes. Everything else, even though it looks like a lot, it's really just a lot of reorganization, kind of moving things around. But the substance of the policy is the same. So that's all I have for presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Frederickson. Trustee Smith?
Thank you, President Taylor. I have a few on this after having gone through a school naming now. The first one is, it's under the policy BII, which falls on page 3. The edited version starts with the school naming committee may adopt a list of names. So what I wanted to talk with my colleagues about and with you is possibly striking the entire last sentence, which is this list may contain previous unused school name finalists. So I'm fine with the first part of this, which may include some previous names, but one thing that I was really attuned to was that those previous names by default move forward, and I'm not really sure that I really support that. I think that it should be a fresh approach for each of these schools. Now, if a previous name goes through the process and is chosen by this community to advance, I'm totally open to that. But this particular line, I think, could be misunderstood as guaranteeing that it move forward. I understand it says may. I understand that it does not technically say it's guaranteed, but I am personally not a supporter of that. And since the line seems to be there, I think that the rest of the statement stands perfectly with just removing that sentence, because one of the themes that I was picking up on is that names just automatically advance and then it becomes their time. And I'm not a supporter of that. Now, that is not to diminish the importance of these names or these people or the honor of naming a school. But I'm very hyper attuned that naming of schools doesn't become a conveyor belt of options where they become predestined. They really should be chosen organically from the community for each of these situations. So anyways, I'll go back to what I said. I'd like to suggest that we just strike that entire last sentence and leave the first portion of it.
So is that a motion, Trustee Smith?
Well, I didn't know if we wanted to talk about it, but I'm
Well,
more
we-
than
no,
happy
we
to
can-
make that
we
a
can- we can
motion.
di-
I just don't
discuss
want to
that.
be unilateral and jump the gun.
I think make it as a motion, a second, then where there can be some discussion.
Yes, I move to remove the last section of item 3B II.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, seconded by trustee Church. Now let's have some discussion. I just want to have a question on this. Current practice is that we get a list of finalists. Let's say we get 3 names that come our way, they're finalists. And we pick, we're going to name this after Samantha. Okay, and there was a lot of conversation and so on like that, so we didn't move Megan's name forward and so on. So then Megan's name would go back to the committee for consideration. It is not automatically a finalist.
Correct. So how it works, I think when the policy was first established and the school naming committee was first established, I believe that it was kind of an automatic thing. The last time the policy was reviewed, I believe this was added because we had
The May.
situations where you had names like Sun Valley Middle School, right? And then you're
And then
naming
we're
a
out-
school
we're out
in
in the
South
South
Reno.
Meadows.
Right. So so the names may move forward. So you're correct in that the other 2 that the board doesn't choose go on this list, that then at the school naming committee, they review that list and they decide, let's keep, Megan's name on the list for now, but let's get rid of the
Or
geographic
we don't
name
want
or
Sun
whatever.
Valley out there because we're out there in the North Valley. I mean, out there in
Correct.
the, or it could be
Correct.
North Valley, it's deep enough, so yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's how it's worked. Yeah.
Okay, and then your recommendation, your motion, talk a little bit through that.
Yeah, and
Trustee
I'm
Smith?
fine with the fact that they may go back, but I still feel the first part of that still covers that. I really believe that the last sentence adds a point of emphasis that I just don't think should be there. The first part of it already says that they can adopt a list of names to be automatically considered. I just think that the last sentence brings in my mind, undesired focus.
No, if I may, just to follow up and so on, just, because I don't know that, does the naming committee have they adopted a list of names? Like according to?
They do that at each meeting before or each time they're naming a school. Before the semifinalist list goes out for that community vote, it's a standing agenda item on the school naming committee's meeting that they decide whether or not they want to keep these. So the list stays, and then they change it each time. So they may decide to take Megan's name off for this particular school, but then next year when they're naming another school, they're not permanently removing Megan's name, I think. So then Megan's name would be back on there. They would have to vote again if they wanted to take it off, if that makes sense.
Okay, so let me say, so there is a list of names.
Yeah.
Right, and then what has typically happened is the names that were finalists but that were not selected.
Yes.
Right. Let's say we didn't move Megan forward. Let's say
Right.
Then that name would be on that list.
Right.
And then at that first meeting, before we're even out for the public to submit names and nominations and so on, the school naming committee says, okay, we have our list. There are 14 names on here because, we've named a lot of schools now, right? So there are 14 names on here. We're going to get rid of these 5 because they're geographical. And then these 2 because it isn't appropriate. That's really appropriate. That's more connected to Mount Rose because it was a ski tavern. It was, it was the ski program or something that happens at that piece.
Exactly.
There. And so then it isn't even a part of the deliberations.
Correct.
As it goes forward. And then Trustee Smith, your motion is saying that help me. So, because you're saying that that's still allowed for based upon this, but
that last sentence just adds to it, and it's not necessary. The first part of it still allows for that process to take place, but removes the sentence that specifically calls it out. So that process could still stand, but that last sentence is really unnecessary in my view, and it brings attention and perhaps conveys a layer of intent that is not really there around previous name finalists advancing. So I think the process is fine. I think the first part of it still allows them to do that, but I genuinely believe that last sentence is not needed.
okay. And for me, thank you for that, because to me, I like to be able to consider other names that were finalists, through the process, right? Not that they're automatically finalists again, but that to be able to consider them again. If they got that far, sometimes they've been two really tight names. It's like, ooh, right? It's like, well, let's keep that person so they can be considered again. And so I would not want that to be gone.
Nope, and I'm fine with
if
that
you will.
too. but I still feel like you can do that and remove that last sentence.
Is that clear? Does that clearly state that, or do we need to state that
I
more
think
clearly?
so. I mean, I'll defer to Mr. Lombardo, but I think that still makes it clear. I don't
Because
know
I
if
hear
that
you.
sentence actually adds much to it now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. We don't want there to be a sense of my name's going to be on there forever, and then one day I'm going to get a school, right? Kind of a.
And that is also directly based on that dialogue we had. And
Yes.
so in rereading this, I feel like there could be a degree of inferred value. And so
Certainly.
I am fine with the process. I have no problem with it. I genuinely believe that that sentence is unnecessary.
I guess that's maybe that. I guess that would be my question to council as well, as they've asked you to weigh in. Does that allow for that to happen without it being? There is an expectation that name is going to be on there into perpetuity, and then one of these days my grandmother's going to get to school, my grandfather, my dad, my whatever, right? You think?
I agree. I don't think the sentence adds anything, and in my mind, I mean, if you really want to get technical, I'm not even sure the second sentence adds anything, but nonetheless,
I would agree with you, actually.
Yeah. I mean, if in my mind, that whole sentences 2 and 3 are administrative regulation language.
Yeah, that's true.
The naming committee adopts the list, and then how it's maintained, that's an administrative regulation. The board.
And I would love to make that
The
amendment.
board's dropping down. Yeah, I just think that's not necessary.
And I would like to amend my motion if there's a friendly on removing sentence 2 and 3.
There could be an amendment, and then if Trustee Church as the second goes along with that.
So we're removing,
The motion that you seconded was removing the third sentence, and
Yeah.
now the friendly being considered is to remove the second sentence as well.
starting with this list. So-
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
And then what should be, how that happens, occurs, should be in the administrative regulations as opposed to in board policy. And it seems pretty clear that the board wants a process to remain, so that can be in regulation, that the finalist names be considered at the committee level. Right, and that should be done regulations wise and so on, so I'm comfortable with that. Anybody? Dr. Nicolette, you had your light on, you're good to cover you as well. Any other discussion? Okay, we did public comment on this, did we not? There's none. Okay, well, we do it again. If ready to get now we've really done it. Dr. Turner, here's your chance, man. No, you're good. You're good. You got your laptops and stuff. You're good. All right, then. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor. The motion is to remove the second and third sentences and put the regular establishment and maintenance of the list in the administrative regulations. Okay. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? Right, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. It is
Oh, I have more.
that's just on that. Go right ahead. We're still on.
Can't
still
be
on.
done already.
Thank you. Okay, so next up, and I believe that this would fall under the administrative guidance that we provide the superintendent, which I believe is section 4. So this would be adding something.
What page, Trustee Smith?
Oh,
Is that
apologies.
page 4? Looks like, huh?
Yes, it
Okay.
is page 4, section
you.
4. So another part of this process that I do believe falls under the administrative side is I would like to direct the committee. So I was thinking about adding a line here about it being a requirement to contact the family or next of kin of any name under consideration when that person is no longer alive to invite their feedback. This would apply only to private citizens. The reason why I say that is because obviously, let's say we want to name a school after JFK, we're not going to go hunt Carolyn down, okay? So this is specifically in relation to people who are no longer with us, who we are considering their name. I'm not comfortable with the idea that they should just know, or the fact that they didn't provide any feedback means that they don't have any, or they're against it or for it. I do not like that kind of vagueness in this process. So I would like us to formalize in our direction to the superintendent that we make a reasonable effort to contact the family or next of kin of any name under consideration when that person is no longer alive to invite their feedback, and that this would apply to private citizens. I'm open to that wording. I recognize I am not a lawyer, but that's the intent that I want to get at. I would very much like it to be an established part of this process,
And
where
that-
because I do not want to be in a situation where we wonder what the feedback is from a family and we just don't know, but we assume that they were aware.
Well, and I would say, and thank you for that. And I would say, I don't think we need the if they are no longer alive. I think if a family member is alive, a reasonable attempt should be made, so that even if we're considering someone who is alive, they may not know as well. And I would say reasonable, because we don't expect staff to put an ad in the Wall Street Journal to try to find somebody. But I would think that not only that, but if they're alive, we want that. And typically, they will know, and the family will be in someone. But we have had a situation where we hadn't heard anything, and so if we make a reasonable attempt, we don't manage what reasonable is. That's up to the superintendent and the team. But I think if they're alive, the same should be in place.
Totally agree. Because although the family or next of kin is certainly under no obligation to weigh in, I believe that this board should know definitively that that occurred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they may find out and say, "Oh, we think that's great," and that's it, and that's okay. But at least they've been contacted. So.
Can I ask a clarifying question about that? So, and maybe I'm overthinking it, should we make it more clear as to when in the process that should occur, that contacting the family members? Because if you think of the first process, which is that nomination, where we could get 100 names, some of those names are going to be instantly struck out by the committee, and then that next process is narrowing it down to the 10 or so semifinalists. So should everybody who's nominated be contacted, or should the semifinalists be contacted, and should we clarify?
So I would say that, to me, this falls under the administrative, subjective and professional opinion of how the committee and the administration chooses, based on how they see fit.
I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would also agree that we can't check out every name that comes our way. So I think if something at a stage when they're reasonably being considered, by the committee. So but that's administrative reg. But I think that's the general. You might get 25 names when you first begin the process, and that's unwieldy.
Sounds good. Makes sense.
Okay, this language. Thank you, Council. Reasonable efforts to contact family members of next of kin of potential local namesakes, and then the detail around that is the administrative reg. So. Okay.
So moved.
Looking like a motion. Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Motion by Trustee Smith, seconded by Trustee Rodriguez. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? All right, the motion is carried, 6-0. Did you have other comments? I know you had a couple
I
comments.
do. Okay, so staying on the administrative side, but again, for dialogue with our presenters and the board, A has the community engagement using available media. I totally support that. One thing that I would like to pass along in the administrative guidance is that the community be fully aware of the weighting rubric. I'm going to tie a direct line to this. We saw overwhelming numbers of votes for names that didn't even move on, and we heard that it was because no one was there to advocate for these names. To me, that represents a weighting of the rubric of the name selection. And I think, and I'm not weighing in on what is right or not right, but the community should absolutely know what the weighting is. Because if you have thousands of votes for something and it does not move on, and the reason is, well, no one was there to advocate for it, then people in the community must know that those thousands of votes do not actually override a couple people showing up. And I'm not weighing in on what's right or not right, because that's where the administrative side comes in the committee. But I do feel passionately that that should be bundled and communicated appropriately. And maybe they will decide differently going into the future with that in mind, but I do believe that the weighting of the rubric should be part of what is communicated to the community.
And that's certainly what that's that's administrative reg piece of it, but so that people know, and maybe part of that might be you can take a look and see where you might want that to fit from a motion standpoint. That whatever the weighting, I hear what you're saying. There's, we had some people weighed in that they did a social media campaign, so then that should be bad. That should, that's really whatever that could. I like saying it's really up to the committee and for the instruction from there. But it's good for people to know so that it's not unclear.
So we could possibly add on to A that says to include the weighting rubric of how the names will be advanced, or something along those lines is what I wrote.
What might be the weighting?
The weighting rubric for selecting the names for advancement.
Okay.
And maybe those are not exactly the right words, but it's the weighting. So the methods of the feedback and the weighting that they have in the process.
Or maybe it's the process, or I want people to understand if they see it, for them to understand. They may not understand the weighting rubric.
Correct. I appreciate that.
I don't try to participate in your deliberations, but I'm trying to help you draft language. Doesn't selection process cover it?
It could, as long as we clarify that, including how the committee will weight the feedback from the community. Because we heard loud and clear that they do weight these channels of feedback, and I believe that weighting should be clear to the community going into the process.
Let's take a look and see what kind of draft we have. Or it could be the details surrounding the selection process.
But the point is well taken that me using the word rubric may not be commonly understood.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
just think
married
that's
to
tough
it.
because I think that might, but so maybe it might be in the details pertaining to the selection process or something like that. Again, I want to make it easy for people to understand, but I I hear you so that people know as much as it's transparent. Other comments, Trustee Manetto, you were leaning in and leaning out.
I keep doing that. Thank you. I like the word rubric better than I like the word weighted, because I think rubric, and maybe this is just some world I live in, but I think people know what a rubric is. But a weighted rubric, But if you just have the rubric there, it tells you what the weight is.
Okay, that might be more
Thank
clear. That might be more clear. Dr. Nicolette?
Thank you for bringing this up, because this was a challenge for a lot of us during the last naming. I think just the word details, and then the superintendent and the team can decide if it's a rubric or if it's a yes or no, or if whatever the process is, however the scale looks, there's going to be a process, and the superintendent decides that, would be my. So just details. Process, details. That suggests to me that there's going to be some details. Whatever format it is, it's up to the superintendent and the experts working on this.
Okay.
Just my thought.
So if we look at what's on the screen, and as council tries to decipher what we're saying, our conversation goes down towards the end. Parents. I'm at 4A, and the community of the names and the committee. In the community, and parents, guardians in the community of the name submission and selection process, including details of the selection rubric.
I like that.
How does that feel?
I feel like that's a so move.
That might be. I feel like that's okay. So there's a motion. There's a so move on that, and it keeps the word rubric. It says provide some more details, but we don't get down into the weeds on that. Okay. Okay, so it's motion on the floor from Trustee Smith, seconded from Trustee Rodriguez. Further discussion? Okay, seeing none, did I ask for public comment on this one? Oh, no, we did public comment on the whole thing as a whole, so we're good. Okay, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show is 6-0. Also, let the record show that Trustee Nicolette said, we're too more far in the weeds. Let's get out. Let's note that. Let's note that. Trustee Smith, further?
I'm good.
Okay. And then what we'll do is take a look then at the revised board policy 7110 as a whole.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you.
Trustee Rodriguez?
I just have one question. It's on page 4, section 2, paragraph or subsection 3. I'm just kind of, if you could explain why a current district employee may not be nominated or was automatically DQ'd from being selected or being nominated.
I think there's conflicts of interest there. That's been in the policy since it was established. I don't know if.
It says for 2 years from the last date of employment.
Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Rombardo has anything to add to that. I'm not really sure the intent of that.
I think it's that. It's been ongoing. It's not unusual for that because of what it is that you're saying. That's all I have.
And I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking too much. I don't know. But, I mean, if you had a bus driver that saved 13 kids from a burning bus from a car accident, I mean, or a school police officer that's eliminating a threat and saves a bunch of students. I mean, even though they are currently district employees, I just don't see, I mean, why possibly take that away from them or wait, 25 years for them to retire to finally nominate or recognize that if the community nominates them. I'd be, if there's no conflict of interest or no legal reasons, I'd like to see that removed.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Rodriguez. Trustee Church?
I just think the emotions are high. We see this all the time with people that pass away, and the emotions are high, and I think time gives you time to reflect on the appropriateness of the decision rather than when the emotions are high. So I'm okay with it as is.
Thank you, Trustee Church. Further discussion? I certainly see both sides of it. I would say that in such an unusual circumstance, as you mentioned, Trustee Rodriguez, the board can always change the policy for that moment or pause it for that moment. There's a word, I can't find it. Moratorium, thank you, to allow for such an extraordinary circumstance. So it doesn't mean that couldn't happen. It would require a moratorium, but I think part of the idea behind it is to make sure everything is absolutely kept above board. There's no perceived conflicts or favoritism or anything like that. But it doesn't prohibit the board from doing the moratorium in such an unusual circumstance like that in my mind, because I certainly hear what you're saying. Sometimes something might happen that might really be like, what, we have this unique opportunity, and then the board at that time can consider it at that time. That's my thinking on it. Okay. Further discussion? Okay, we do have a motion on do we have a motion on, no, we're looking for a motion, and you asked for a question. Motion to approve the revised Board Policy 7110.
So moved. I'm going to clean sweep it.
Okay, clean sweep it. Motion from Trustee Smith. Is there a second? Seconded from Trustee Rodriguez. All right, so the motion is then that the Board Policy Committee forwards the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7110, naming of schools and other district facilities, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? All right, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous, which is 6-0. And now we're on Board Policy 7205, discussion and possible action to recommend revisions. Thank you, ladies. To and/or for the proposed revisions of Board Policy 7205, Information Technology Data Access Policy, specifically to update formatting and clarify language, to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And before us is Dr. Chris Turner. Welcome back, Dr. Turner.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Chris Turner, Chief Information Officer. We're here to discuss Board Policy 7205, as you capably introduced, Data Access Policy. This is since we're data collectors, this is the most critical task that we serve here in the district, in the IT department. This revision that comes to you today is a modernization. As you'll note on the back page, the last time this was addressed was in 2014. We sought to remove language that was antiquated or also more appropriate for administrative regulations or administrative procedures. And then I always feel like it's important to put definitions right at the top so that the reader has an understanding of the content that follows.
Okay, if you would, Dr. Turner, would you mind just kind of walking us through the significant changes? Or
Sure. Let's go right to the top. The purpose of the policy, and in consultation with Dr. McNeil as I worked through this policy and with council. There was debate about, if you look at about the third or fourth sentence down, which is underlined, the board considers the security and confidentiality of student and employee records a matter of concern, and each individual who has access to confidential information is expected to adhere to the district's procedures and protocols. There was some debate internally about whether that should be stricken, but I agree with Dr. McNeil's counsel on this statement because it's very mission oriented. We like to emphasize the fact that we are data stewards, and we take that role very, very seriously. Moving down, you'll see the addition of the definitions that were at the conclusion of the policy. Those have been moved up, like I already outlined. It's important for all of our readers to understand the roles that we all play in terms of being stewards of data. And then as you scroll down to the second page, you'll notice that there has been a lot of deletions, a wealth of strikeouts. All that language is more procedure oriented and is being moved from board policy into administrative procedures and regulations. As you continue, you'll see more strike-throughs. Those are more operational sort of descriptors, and what we're seeking is to move those to, again, administrative procedures, along with the table that is on page 4 and all of the language that's stricken after that. Moving on to page 5, page 6. Again, all the strike-throughs are moving from board policy to administrative regulations and procedures. It was explained to me, so I'm no longer new here, right? This is my second year, completing my second year, but this is my first time going through board policy. So I had to avail myself of wise counsel and learn this process. I didn't know how aggressive I could be in terms of rewriting policy here in the district, and I was really happy to work with Andrea Schulwich in the legal department and Neil Rombardo, who helped guide this process. But what I saw was antiquated language and language that was more operational rather than mission and vision oriented. So much of the deletions are being moved to other places, and we're trying to clarify and really simplify this board policy 7205.
Okay, that pretty much takes us through that. Let's see. Oh, do we have any public comment on this one?
There's no public comment.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie. Trustee Rodriguez?
Just to understand, this is your second year with the district?
Completing my second year, yes.
Is that why you wore your parking pass at graduation?
Oh, thank you. Let the record show that is that in the policy?
You weren't even there yet.
I want to say, look, you had yours handy. I wore mine last week, too. Look. Very good.
I'll go find mine.
I wore mine last week. So you're saying you do not want that in policy? It's extraneous. You're right. Yes. Let's not be extra. Put that in the reg.
Thank goodness there's no photographic evidence, right?
Oh, we missed an opportunity.
No, there is.
Ooh. It just may appear when you least expect it.
I'm so happy that the mileage on this mistake on my part just continues. We're two weeks now. Excellent.
I just think it was important for Trustee Rodriguez to point out that is not in board policy. Thank you so much. We want the record to show that. You got that, Jeannie? It's not in. She got it. Okay, awesome.
I do have that this time on this occasion.
Dr. Nicolette.
Okay. I think mine's in my bag, and I was going to dig it out, but I thought, nah, I'm not going to do that to you.
Thankfully, there was some people that knew me at the gate that provided me entry so I could participate in my son's graduation.
It's good to laugh. It's good to laugh.
It is. Thank you.
Okay, back to Board Policy 7205. I have a question, and it's related to a new term that I kind of keep looking for, and it's like the data inputter. And the reason I bring that up is I think about instructional data. And on page 1, I see number 2, data steward, get it. And then I go all the way to number 3, data user. And I feel, help me understand, I feel like there should be something about the person, like a teacher or a counselor, who inputs the data and their definition and responsibility. And that's really, that's instructional kinds of data. And so maybe that doesn't belong here.
No, I actually think you surfaced a good point. So as I read definition 3, a data user, the verb there is access, but I think the addition of input and or access would be appropriate there, because I think the data user is somebody that supplements the data, but also has access to it too. So I like your
Thank you. I
like
agree.
your guidance.
Thank you.
So thank you. We're going to stay on that. So you would like to make that as a motion? You know, we go kind
I
of.
would like to make it a motion, although I think data inputter is probably not the right term. The
data entry. Let's look at some language. Thank you.
Okay.
I think that's what Chief Turner.
Has been authorized to input and access data. I like that.
Okay.
To input and access
Thank
data.
you. That's perfect.
We can say
So
AKA.
fast.
But I do kind of like inputter.
He's
just-
not
but that
distracted by
works.
the parking tag.
I was laughing.
It was pretty funny. Superintendent?
So if you look at, I'm just seeking some clarification here so we're not putting additional language that we don't need. So if you take a look at number 1 under access, a user, system, or process is considered to have access to the data if it has one or more of the following privileges: the ability to read or view the data, update or change the existing data, create new data, delete data. So it does give pretty clear parameters as far as what the user of the data is going to do. So I think of Infinite Campus and teachers inputting grades. They have access to that. They can manipulate that data and change it. So I thought that the clarification as far as a user or inputter was pretty clear there.
You know, I wouldn't argue that, although it is access. It's not technically, you know, I guess I would prefer access and to have the ability to input and access data for the performance of his or her job duties. I would prefer to add it. And I don't know if it's redundant so much as clarifies.
So say that. What's your recommendation, Dr. Nicolette?
I'm going to read what Neil has here. A data user is an individual that has been authorized to input and access data for the performance of his or her job duties. I like it there as a clarification of the accessor in number 1.
Counsel?
The other way of, and again, it's always up to the board, so I just am looking at, I think what you could do is under access is change that to say data user. So then it's consistent with below, right? So the data user has access, and if you go look at, and we put the word access in number 3 in quotes so that somebody who's reading it understands we're referring to our definition above. And then when you look at the definition of access, you would have is the flow of information between a store of data and a data user. Next sentence, a data user is considered to have access to data. So wherever you had the word user, you just drop data in front of it, so then you're referencing between the two of each other. Does that make sense?
Then it's more
Does
clear
make
that it's
sense.
clarifying.
So that might be another way of doing it. It's up to the board.
Dr. Nicolette, you're the motioner on this one. So
I
would
am
you?
the motioner on this one. And if you don't mind, Neil, where would you put that in access so I can read it?
I would put it right there, or I just added it there.
Data user.
And put it here. See where I just.
Yep,
highlighted
yes.
that? I have to read the rest, sorry. I think think that would
That's
be
it.
it.
I think that's it.
And then we would remove,
And then I would remove
In-
it from here, and you could do this, so that it's.
The same
Oh,
as above.
sure.
And if you really want to get into it, we could even do that, like that, around data users. This way you're showing people who are reading that you're using your definitions from below.
From below.
If you feel like that makes it more clear.
access, I'm going to read it out loud if you don't mind. Access, number one, under definitions, is the flow of information between a store of data and a, quote, data user system or process. A data user, quotes, system or process is considered to have access to data. Then number three, a data user, quotes, is an individual that has been authorized to, quotes, access data for the performance of his or her job duties. I make a motion to do just what I read.
You make a motion for the above changes. Is there a second?
Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the aforementioned changes which are on the board? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 Opposition? Right, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous.
Could I just get the second? Who
The
that
second,
was?
I'm
Okay.
sorry, Trustee Manetto was the seconder, and then Trustee Nicolette was the motioner.
Thank you for your help.
Okay. Yeah, clearly. Okay, did you have, okay, I missed, sorry, Trustee Church, I missed it. It's probably something good. All right, I just have one question, and we may not even need to say this, but just want to make sure that it shows a concern further on our part. Page 3, down to number 2. This restricts that we're only going to maintain confidential information in areas where there's a legitimate and justifiable need. As access from this original source. Do we want to say anything about that we will only maintain data for as long? I know there's some things we can't control, but say that we don't keep data any longer than we have to. Anything, did I miss that? Is that in here somewhere, Superintendent?
We have a retention policy, a records retention policy that covers that. I think we do.
Is that here? We probably.
The records retention policy is state law.
Okay.
And I think that's what the
That's what-
superintendent's
so we-
referring to, and I think I heard Trustee Rodriguez mention it. So we have to follow it either way.
Okay.
It's not it doesn't matter, you could say
We
whatever
can say it
you
or not
wanted,
say it,
and
but-
we're still gonna follow that, because we have to. You could exceed it if you wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
and say, we're gonna hold things ad infinitum, but I don't know why you would do that.
Yeah.
So,
Anybody else concerned about that, or? So do you think we need to state that, or?
no, I don't, but if you want to, I can try to build it in.
Colleagues, what do you think?
You do have the board policy complies with NRS.
Yeah, I'm looking at page 7.
Yeah, at the end?
You know, I concur with you absolutely, President, because I think we have in the past shown some concern about how long data is maintained.
Yeah, and I think we're concerned about that. I mean, if we're covered here in terms of it, I guess somewhere in there, I wanted to be clear that we're only keeping data either as long as we need it or as long as we
Required by law.
required by law, something like that. I thought just important to show that we know that's important, and it's of a concern to ours. So
I was looking for something like that.
leave it out there. So then that way, if we were to throw in something like that, if we were to add in something like that, include, let's see, where was I? I lost my own place now. Was I on page 3?
Page 3,
Page
subsection 2.
Yeah, should that, maybe in addition to that paragraph, and maybe it doesn't, or should it stand on its own? I don't know if it should stand on its own. Let's see.
I think it should stand on its
Does
own,
it stand
because
on
that
there?
one's being specific to confidential.
Right.
You're saying not only
Yes.
confidential, but non-confidential.
Yes, yes.
So data,
Or the district will,
Data retention.
yeah, the district will only retain data.
Could I suggest?
Sure.
Just a thought. The board directs the superintendent to develop regulations consistent with state and federal law for the purging of outdated information, something like that. But would it be appropriate to direct the superintendent to put that in a regulation? I guess is my point.
Well, yeah, I want it in the policy. I hear you. I do. And I think ordinarily, but I think because it's such a big issue, and I think it's a big issue, I think a statement in there shows that the board's concerned about it. I mean, that's, what do you think about here? But I hear you, and it could certainly be done that way.
Is data the right term?
Yes,
Should it be student data or just data?
data, because it could be employee data
It could be
too.
employee data.
Yeah.
So I like the broad term data.
I was looking for something like we won't exceed that. We will only, something that's a little more, yeah. Or something just that's a little stronger in that. Certainly we're going to follow the law, but we're only going to keep it as long as we have to.
Right.
So to speak. So maybe it's going to say the same thing, but it isn't going, but it's just a little more active or something like that.
But no longer than necessary? Fairly generic, right at the very end?
Maybe no longer
I put it
than.
at the end, actually.
Well, no, maybe no. I said what you're saying. Maybe no longer than necessary, consistent with state and federal law, or something like that. Well, that sound legally.
Necessary is pretty vague.
No longer than required.
Oh, okay. No longer than required and consistent with state and federal law.
I would actually, if I might speak out, I think required is too hard. Necessary is a little more vague. In other words, if it's not required, then they say, we got to get rid of it. And we said, well, we think we should maybe keep this a few more years. In the spirit of transparency. So required, I'm not too comfortable.
We think, Madam Superintendent, is there information that we want to keep a little bit longer because maybe we're following a kid, because by law we have, but that's by law that we follow a kid.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of circumstances where that would come in. I mean, I'm satisfied with necessary, and then you have your qualifier in there, obviously, with state and federal law.
So necessary gives you a little more. So we'll go with necessary. Okay, no longer than necessary and consistent with state and federal law. Then that way, if there's some reason that, and who knows, right? We aren't violating our own policy. Okay. All right. Oh, we don't have a motion yet. Do we have a motion on that? No, I just brought that up. That was me. That's right. That was me. Any other comment? Can we have a motion to this effect then? I'll make it. What the heck is mine? I move that we add number 3. Hey, we've been here since 8.
That was good.
And there's a second, but Trustee Trustee Church jumped in. Did you jump in on second? Okay. All right, any further discussion on this one? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? All right, the motion carries. Let the record show it is 5-0. We're dropping off.
Yes, we
We
are.
better hurry up and finish.
Uh-huh.
Okay, dropping like flies. All right, overall policy, then we're looking, if there's no further concerns, a motion to approve the revised policy, board policy 7205. Motion by Trustee Rodriguez. Is there a second? Second by Trustee Minetto. No further discussion? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? All right, the motion is carried. Let the record show it is unanimous. What do you have? You have it? Oh, there's picture proof. I think we might need that. Board reports. Oh, wait, wrong meeting. All right. Any closing public comment, Jeannie?
Could
There's
you
no
share
public
that?
comment.
Yeah, you can airdrop that to us, Superintendent.
I think it should go to communications.
No public comment. So, all right, no public comment. Yes, I did ask.
No
All right.
PC.
All right. So the meeting is adjourned. Our next board policy meeting. Happy summer, everybody. Is August 16th.